Welcome back to the garage, where we are continuing to work on the Ducati 1198S. In this video, we're specifically looking at extracting the axle from the rear hub and then removing the hub itself and inspecting the bearings within. In the previous video, we removed the swing arm and shock and wheel and everything from the bike, so now it's just resting on jack stands. And here is the subject of today's video, the swing arm itself. So on my bike, I wasn't able to remove the axle from the swing arm. And typically, that's a fairly easy process. You just remove this hub where the sprocket is, and then it should just be able to be tapped out pretty easily. Therefore, you can then remove the eccentric hub itself from the swing arm. Mine is putting up quite a fight, to the point where I had to smack it really hard with the hammer, and I still couldn't get it to budge. And when the bike is suspended precariously on jack stands like that, you really can't deliver too much force without risking toppling the entire bike over on its side. So really the only option for me was to pull the swing arm out, which was fine because I had to get the shock rebuilt anyways. Now I'm going to try a couple methods of trying to extract this axle from the hub. I'm going to start with just tapping it with a wooden block and a hammer. If that doesn't quite do it, then I'm going to move over to the hydraulic press. So here is why this axle wasn't coming out like everybody else's axle that can just basically pull it straight out. This right here is a bearing race, and it is clearly seized to the shaft. There is no way you're going to tap this out. This really would have to be pressed out. This is very common when you're doing wheel bearings on cars. Really, when this happens, you know you have to replace the bearing, which thankfully I have bearings coming to do this whole job. Now, I will have to get a bearing race puller on this to extract it even further before I can even do anything with this axle here. So we'll do that next. Well, that came off a lot easier than I thought it would. Okay, let's take a look at the condition of everything here. So the hub itself is not filled up with too much dirt and grit, but you'll notice there's actually a lot of aluminum shavings on the center portion, which is a bit concerning. And I think it's just left over from the manufacturing process, which, I mean, here's the only real sand and debris. I was expecting to see a lot more of that. So we'll see more of this on the inside of the swing arm. But here is what the bearing looks like. on this hub, so clearly this is not going back together. So we will definitely have to replace these bearings. Again, that inner race just came out when I removed the axle, and you can see signs of other corrosion that would have caused that seizing that happened. Obviously, this outer seal is destroyed on the bearing, so yeah, it's not salvageable. The other side looks relatively okay. This is a sleeve, a spacer, that does need to come out. I just haven't been able to remove it yet. And then this is just an exterior seal that I plan to replace as well. But overall, the barrel, or the eccentric itself, looks in decent shape. Let's move on to the swing arm. You can see on the inside, there's all of these aluminum shavings here, which, again, I think is left over from the manufacturing process, I guess. But that's not good. I would think they'd flush this out before they assembled everything, but I guess not. Silver lining is this didn't get trapped in this like tight sliding fit where the eccentric rides, so ultimately it doesn't really matter, but we will make sure we clean this all out before it goes back together. Honestly, inside this void right here, I was expecting to see just a chunk of sand and dirt, which there's not, so that's a very good thing. If we move over to the swing arm bearings themselves, they're not seized. This one, very stiff. So we will go in there, lubricate all that, of course. The rose joint on the shock linkage here is smooth, but there's a lot of dirt in there, so we will clean this up. But otherwise, everything's in pretty good shape overall. And there we are. That is the hub fully disassembled, bearings removed. Now it's just a matter of cleaning before we put it all back together. 31 foot-pounds. Alright, so I have worked ahead a bit here and cleaned up the Eccentric hub and all of the relevant parts. You can see that this is all nice and clean and ready to be basically rebuilt. Here's the internal spacer, nice looking part, and then the external axle spacer, and then the internal snap ring we'll need to use. And then we'll see we have the new bearings right here. These are quite difficult to source. They do have to come from Europe. It is what you need to rebuild one of these hub units. This one is the sealed bearing, and then this one is kind of that roller style bearing. So, and then lastly we have the hub seal itself. This does have to come from Ducati. I couldn't find anyone else supplying it. It's just a really unique thickness, I think 4.5 millimeters thick. And that's kind of the last thing we'll install. I'm hoping I don't need to use a press or any sort of drift to actually install these bearings. The way we'll do this is just stick these in the freezer for maybe 30 minutes to an hour, and then heat this up with either a heat gun or an open flame, just to kind of get it warmed up so that these shrink up. This expands just enough to drop these in or lightly tap them into place. So the idea here is we'll install this one first, Then we'll flip it over, install this spacer, and then we'll install this bearing last. So I found out the wheel nut socket that I have for this is actually the perfect diameter to press this into place, so no tapping needed. I'll just take it over to the press and gently push it on in. You can see it just fits nicely inside the bore, so no risk of it getting stuck. Of course it falls in perfectly now. Never mind, I guess you can do this without a press. There you have it. So I got the perimeter heated up to like about 160 degrees, which I thought I had it at least that hot over there on the bench. So maybe I got the bearing colder somehow? Not sure. Maybe it was the grease. I didn't put grease on the bench, so. Now we put in the spacer. It really is directional, so you want to make sure the thicker chamfer or shoulder is pointed upwards. So it goes in like here. And you'll know if you put it in the wrong way because it doesn't really fit one direction. See how that slots nicely into that bearing? It won't do that if you put it in the wrong way. All right, round two. So this bearing didn't quite drop in all of the way, so I do need to press it in probably another 2 or 3 millimeters. And again, this rear wheel nut socket works perfectly. That is now at the correct depth. All right, that is the swing arm reassembled with the eccentric adjuster installed, fully greased, new bearings, and looking much better for itself. Also got the swing arm bearings lubricated and the shock linkage there lubricated as well, and generally just cleaned up. So that's probably where we're going to stop the video here, because I don't have a whole lot left to do until I get that shock back, and I think we're still a couple weeks out. Here is the bike, also cleaned up much more. You can see the back of the engine case doesn't have chain sling or just dirt everywhere anymore. That's what I was looking to do, just give it a nice clean once over. Obviously we re-greased the rocker pivot here, so that feels nice and smooth. It's all cleaned down throughout here. Oh, just an update on our anti-rotation clutch push rod. I haven't had any oil leak ever since installing that. So if anyone's kind of on the fence about whether or not that stops the oil leak, it does. No problem since. Not to mention the lever pull at the clutch lever is much softer. So overall, definitely worthwhile improvement. I've also gone through, cleaned up all of the assorted parts, as this assembly was very dirty. I was able to clean up this axle. Got a lot of those kind of burn marks that were on there that ended up causing the bearing shell to seize to it. So that should reassemble much nicer. And over here, gave the chain and everything a nice cleaning, so it's ready to just go back together. So, as you can see, things are making good progress, just waiting to get that shock back, and then we can put it all back together. But that wraps us up for today. As always, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you all again soon.